The scrape of the chair legs against the polished wooden floor echoed like a warning bell, slicing through the cozy hum of Christmas chatter. In that instant, my stepdad's hand clamped down on the back of my chair, and the world tilted. The movement was no accident. It was a statement, a deliberate gesture that sent me tumbling to the floor. As I landed, the room of 23 family members seemed to freeze in time. Each pair of eyes locked on me as if I were the evening's entertainment. The pain from my hip hitting the floor was sharp but fleeting. What lingered was the suffocating silence that followed. Not a single person moved to help me. My mother sat just a few feet away, her gaze fixed firmly on her plate, as if acknowledging my fall would shatter the fragile peace she had chosen over defending her daughter. My stepfather's voice cut through the tension with a chilling finality. "This seat is for my real daughter. Move." The word real stung more than the fall. It was a blade honed by years of subtle exclusions, now wielded openly. My fingers trembled as I pushed myself up, scanning the faces around the table. Some looked away. Others watched with a mix of pity and discomfort, but no one spoke up. It was as if my humiliation had been scripted into the evening's festivities, an unspoken tradition that everyone silently accepted. But the real impact of that moment was not the fall itself. It was the realization that this was the final crack in a facade I had tried to hold together for far too long. My stepfather might have thought he was simply reclaiming a seat at the table, but in truth, he was pushing me into a place of clarity I had never known before. And as I steadied myself, a quiet resolve began to form beneath the sting of rejection. What happened next would not just change my place at that table. It would unravel secrets and set in motion a series of events none of them were prepared for. Because the true story did not begin with me hitting the floor that night. It began with everything I was about to uncover, and the revenge that would follow. My name is Simona Cunningham, and I entered this world with the kind of resilience that grows in silence rather than ceremony. People often assume that strength comes from bold victories or loud confidence, but mine was shaped by the quieter battles, the ones no one acknowledges, the ones fought within rooms that should have felt safe, but never truly did. My childhood carried a strange duality. On the surface, I appeared to be the polite, well-adjusted daughter who never raised concerns. Beneath that exterior, however, lived a young girl who learned early on how to read expressions, anticipate disappointment, and survive emotional cold fronts. Losing my father at a young age carved a permanent hollow inside my life, and the world that followed his absence never fit quite right again. My mother remarried when I was still figuring out who I needed to become. Frank Morrison arrived in our lives with the polished charm of a man who understood exactly how to win trust. He came with smiles, promises, and the kind of confidence that made people believe he cared. Yet beneath his well-tailored exterior, there existed a shadow I did not understand at the time. A shadow that stretched farther than any of us realized. Before I continue, I want to ask you something important. Please take a moment to like this video and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your support means more than you know, and it allows stories like mine to reach those who may feel alone in their own battles. The version of me who sat at that Christmas table was not weak. She was simply unaware of the truths waiting beneath years of silence. My fall that night did not break me. Instead, it cracked open a path I never intended to walk, yet one I was destined for. Something far more significant than a ruined dinner was unfolding, and the events leading to that night held answers I had ignored for far too long. The story of how Frank entered our lives is the first piece of a puzzle that would soon expose everything hidden behind his carefully crafted mask. Frank Morrison stepped into our lives with the timing of a man who understood the power of vulnerability. My mother was still grieving my father with a quiet desperation she never admitted aloud. And Frank arrived at the precise moment when her need for stability outweighed her instinct for caution. His first appearance felt almost rehearsed, as if he had studied the art of comforting widows long before he ever met her. His introduction came during a community gathering at our local church, where grief support groups met on Wednesday evenings. The room smelled faintly of old wood and lemon polish, and the soft murmur of hushed conversations floated in the air as people shared carefully measured pieces of their pain. My mother rarely spoke during those meetings, but Frank managed to draw words out of her with the ease of a practiced confidant. His charm carried a polished confidence that impressed everyone around him. He held the door open, listened attentively, offered gentle smiles at precisely the right moments, and spoke with a compassion that felt almost too perfect. People praised him for his patience, his kindness, his understanding. I watched from the corner, noticing details that others missed. His eyes were warm when they rested on my mother, yet strangely detached whenever they shifted away from her. His words felt sincere, but the rhythm of his compliments sounded identical each time he repeated them to different people. My mother embraced Frank's presence with the relief of someone finally offered a lifeline. He filled our home with conversations that sounded hopeful, and he made promises that soothed the aching spaces my father's absence had left behind. He brought flowers, cooked meals, and volunteered for household tasks he never truly completed. Each gesture contributed to an image he carefully constructed, a man willing to rebuild a broken family. My relationship with him began on a polite but distant note. He complimented my grades, attended my school events, and tried to position himself as a supportive figure. Yet a subtle discomfort lingered beneath the surface. His compliments often felt observational rather than affectionate, as if he were studying me rather than connecting with me. His attempts at fatherly warmth stopped the moment others left the room, replaced by a cool indifference that I struggled to interpret. The shift became more noticeable once he married my mother. His helpful gestures slowly faded, replaced by requests, rules, and times, and expectations that revolved around his convenience. The man who once seemed invested in our healing now stood at the center of our household like a self-appointed authority. My mother, exhausted from years of grief, leaned into his confidence without questioning the price of dependence. The earliest cracks in his facade were small enough for most people to ignore, yet I noticed them every time he dismissed my opinion, every time he corrected my tone, and every time he reminded my mother that families needed structure. His presence no longer felt protective. It felt territorial. Those first months set the foundation for everything that followed. His role as a savior was a performance that had captivated my mother completely. But beneath the surface lay threads of something far more calculated, and soon those threads would begin to unravel in ways none of us expected. The earliest signs that something in our household had shifted appeared quietly, almost invisibly. Like shadows lengthening at sunset, Frank had mastered the art of subtle imbalance, and for a while, those imbalances seemed harmless enough to overlook. My mother brushed them aside as personality quirks, and I convinced myself that adaptation took time. Yet beneath the polite surface, something colder had begun to shape the atmosphere of our home. The first instance occurred a few weeks after Frank officially moved in. My birthday arrived with the usual anticipation, and I expected nothing extravagant, only acknowledgement. He handed me a small envelope with a rehearsed smile, inside of which lay a bus pass and a printed lecture on the value of self-sufficiency. The gesture felt strangely impersonal, almost administrative, but I accepted it politely. 2 months later, Brittany, his daughter, received a brand new Honda for turning 18. The contrast was so sharp it nearly stole the breath from my lungs. The favoritism continued with small but relentless patterns. Brittany's choices were celebrated, even when reckless. My accomplishments, no matter how significant, were met with indifference. When I earned an academic award, Frank offered me a brief nod before shifting the conversation to Brittany's plans for an extravagant weekend trip. His selective enthusiasm exposed a truth I wished I could ignore. He had carved a divide within our family, and I stood on the colder side of it. My mother, caught between loyalty and exhaustion, failed to see the shift clearly. She insisted that Frank meant well, that he was adjusting, that I needed to be patient. Grief had softened her once sharp intuition, and Frank used that softness as a shield. When he corrected me at the dinner table for speaking too confidently, my mother laughed nervously and told me not to take it personally. When he dismissed my opinions in front of guests, she excused him as being traditional. Brittany's presence amplified the imbalance. She wandered through our home with the entitlement of someone accustomed to admiration. Frank's eyes followed her with pride, while mine barely registered unless I violated some unspoken rule. She received opportunities without earning them. I worked tirelessly and received reminders to stay humble. Each comparison carved another shallow wound, and although none of them were deep enough to stand alone, together they created a map of preferential treatment I could no longer ignore. Financial choices revealed deeper fractures. My father had left behind educational funds for my future, yet when I attempted to access them, I learned they had mysteriously vanished. Frank attributed the loss to market volatility, an explanation that sounded polished but hollow. That same year, Brittany enrolled in a private art school with tuition far beyond our means. Somehow, funds appeared for her without hesitation. The emotional distance grew with every overlooked slight. Frank's words carried an undercurrent of judgment whenever addressed to me, while his tone softened instantly around Brittany. What once resembled a family now felt more like a hierarchy. My place inside it narrowed a little more each day. These early red flags were not isolated incidents. They were fragments of a larger pattern that had not yet revealed its full shape. And soon, that pattern would become impossible to ignore. The years that followed formed a quiet, persistent erosion of everything I once believed about family. Frank did not dismantle my world in a single blow. He dismantled it piece by piece through carefully measured acts that seemed harmless when viewed alone, but devastating when assembled together. Each slight, each dismissal, each uneven decision created a landscape where my presence felt increasingly optional. The financial imbalances revealed themselves first. My father's business had been a modest but steady source of income before his passing, something he had built with discipline and integrity. After Frank became involved, unexplained withdrawals appeared, followed by sudden investments that never materialized into anything meaningful. He spoke confidently about restructuring, growth, and opportunities, but the numbers on the statements told a different story. Money disappeared, yet Brittany's lifestyle expanded effortlessly. The comparison between us became a permanent fixture in the household. Brittany received lavish birthday parties, designer clothes, new electronics, and spontaneous weekend trips. My requests for necessities were met with lectures on responsibility and gratitude. When I questioned the depletion of my educational fund, Frank responded with a detailed explanation about unpredictable markets, delivered with the polished assurance of a man who expected no further questions. My mother accepted his reasoning without hesitation, unaware that her trust was being weaponized against her own daughter. The emotional landscape of our home shifted just as dramatically. Conversations between Frank and my mother grew increasingly private, excluding me from discussions that once included my input. They shared whispers behind partially closed doors, exchanged glances that suggested unspoken agreements, and dismissed my questions with rehearsed reassurance. I became a visitor in my own home, navigating around their partnership as if intruding upon a territory where my presence required permission. Brittany thrived in this environment. She wielded her father's favoritism like an unofficial badge of authority. She interrupted me mid-sentence without consequence, blamed me for conflicts she initiated, and mocked the seriousness of my academic goals. Frank rewarded her behavior with indulgence, often praising her creativity or resilience. Even when her actions bordered on reckless, my mother, caught between tension and loyalty, compromised her own fairness in the hope of keeping peace. The imbalance intensified once Brittany entered college. Despite her inconsistent attendance and shifting majors, Frank funded her every whim. Tuition payments, apartment rent, car maintenance, and a series of impulsive investments were covered without hesitation. Meanwhile, I worked long hours while studying, balancing responsibilities Frank claimed would build character. The difference was no longer subtle. It was a public declaration that Brittany was the priority, while I was the responsibility. Family gatherings evolved into stages where Frank showcased his role as a devoted father to Brittany, while my existence served as a backdrop. Relatives offered praise for his generosity, unaware of the financial strain it created. My efforts were acknowledged only when convenient, often overshadowed, moments later, by Brittany's dramatically delivered stories. My achievements felt irrelevant, dismissed with polite smiles, or minimized as expectations rather than accomplishments. The emotional neglect deepened as I grew older. Frank reserved his warmth exclusively for my mother and Brittany, leaving me with controlled politeness at best. He corrected my tone during conversations, reminded me to listen rather than speak, and expressed thinly veiled disappointment in choices that had no impact on him. My mother became increasingly dependent on his approval, mirroring his judgments through small comments she once would have never made. The culmination of these years formed a pattern impossible to deny. Frank had not simply preferred Brittany. He had systematically pushed me to the margins through financial manipulation, emotional exclusion, and psychological dominance. The home that once represented comfort became a carefully controlled space where my voice held no weight. Despite the imbalance, I endured quietly, believing that stability required compromise. I convinced myself that maturity meant understanding perspectives other than my own. Even when those perspectives minimized my worth, I worked, studied, saved, and persevered, carrying the hope that time would soften Frank's rigid stance and restore balance. That hope proved misplaced. The final year before the Christmas incident revealed cracks too wide to repair. Arguments between my mother and me became more frequent, triggered by misunderstandings rooted in Frank's influence. Conversations with him grew colder, sharper, and more condescending. Brittany's entitlement reached new heights, fueled by her belief that she occupied the highest tier of our family's hierarchy. I observed each shift with quiet resignation, unaware that these changes were preparing me for a truth I had yet to uncover. Those years of unfairness were not merely obstacles. They were chapters in a larger story that had been unfolding without my knowledge. Every imbalance, every slight, every moment of silence was part of a trajectory leading toward a revelation far greater than any of us expect. And that revelation was closer than I realized. The Christmas table shimmered beneath warm chandelier light, giving the illusion of comfort I had never truly felt there. Platters of roasted turkey, glazed ham, and perfectly arranged side dishes filled the air with aromas capable of softening even the hardest hearts. Yet mine felt heavy as stone. Every year carried an undercurrent of tension, but something about that night felt sharper, as if the room itself understood a line would soon be crossed. The moment began with a seemingly harmless detail: the seat I had occupied every Christmas since childhood. It was the place my father once insisted belonged to me, a quiet tradition no one questioned while he lived. After his passing, my mother preserved it for sentimental reasons, even when the rest of our family dynamics shifted beneath Frank's influence. That year, however, the meaning of the seat changed without warning. The first indication arrived through Brittany's dramatic entrance. She swept into the dining room almost 2 hours late, draped in designer fabric she likely purchased with money Frank claimed we lacked. Her arrival sparked immediate admiration from the relatives who adored spectacle more than sincerity. She basked in their praise with the confidence of someone who had never earned her privilege, yet felt entitled to every fragment of it. Frank's expression transformed the instant he saw her. His eyes brightened, his posture straightened, and a wide smile appeared as if her presence were the missing piece of a perfect evening. He rose from his chair with a burst of enthusiasm that felt oddly theatrical. The entire table followed the movement with their eyes, unaware that they were witnessing the beginning of my breaking point. His footsteps carried a deliberate energy as he approached me. Each step seemed heavier than the last, creating a thudding rhythm that echoed against the polished floors. He stopped directly behind my chair, casting a shadow over my shoulder. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. His voice rang out with a tone that resembled authority rather than tradition. "This seat is for my real daughter. Move." The room went silent so quickly, it felt as if the air had been sucked out. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks remained suspended above half-finished plates. Even the fireplace seemed to crackle more softly. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs with a force that nearly drowned out the rising whispers of shock. The word "real" carved through my chest with startling precision, sharper than any insult he had ever delivered before. My breath lodged in my throat as I looked around, searching for even one person willing to challenge him. Every face stared back with a frozen, conflicted discomfort. My mother pressed her lips together, hands trembling slightly as she lowered her fork. She did not speak. She did not blink. She simply folded into silence as if her voice no longer belonged to her. My fingers curled protectively around the edges of the chair, but it did not matter. Frank's grip tightened on the backrest. He pulled it with an abrupt, jarring force that sent the tablecloth shifting and several glasses rattling perilously close to the edge. My balance faltered, and before I could steady myself, the chair jerked again. The momentum lifted me just enough for gravity to take control. My body struck the floor in a disorienting cascade of sensations. A sharp sting shot through my hip. A wave of heat flashed beneath my skin. The hardwood felt unforgiving, echoing the dull thud of the impact. A splash of cranberry sauce landed across my dress, creating an almost theatrical blotch of red that matched the humiliation burning in my cheeks. The silence that followed held the weight of a verdict. My grandmother gasped softly, her hand rising to her chest. No one else reacted. My cousins exchanged uneasy glances, yet none made a move to stand. My uncle, a man known for documenting everything on his phone, held his device angled slightly in my direction. His thumb hovered dangerously close to the record button, as if my pain were merely content waiting to happen. The sense of betrayal washed over me in cold waves. My mother remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth instead of her daughter. Frank stared down at me with quiet triumph. as though he had restored some distorted sense of order. The emotional collapse began slowly, almost imperceptibly. My eyes stung from more than the fall. My chest tightened until drawing breath felt like swallowing glass. My hands trembled as I pushed myself up, not because I lacked strength, but because I could not comprehend how easily an entire room chose silence over justice. The humiliation did not crush me, it transformed me. Something fragile within me finally cracked open, releasing a surge of clarity that felt dangerously steady. I rose from the floor, wiped my hands on my dress, and met my stepfather's gaze with a calm that surprised even me. He believed this was victory. He believed this was control. He believed I would shrink, apologize, or quietly disappear. He had no understanding of what that single act had awakened. This moment was not the end he intended. It was the beginning of a reckoning he never saw coming. And the truth waiting beyond this night would dismantle everything he claimed to protect. The cold air outside struck my skin the moment I stepped through the doorway. Yet it felt warmer than the silence I had left behind. Snow had begun to fall in gentle spirals, settling on the ground with a softness that mocked the harshness inside me. My breath formed faint clouds as I walked away from the house, each exhale sharp with disbelief. The world around me shimmered under silver streetlights, but my vision blurred with unshed tears that refused to fall. A low wave of pain pulsed through my hip as I reached my car, the physical reminder of the fall merging with a far deeper ache in my chest. I opened the door with trembling hands and sank onto the cold seat, feeling the weight of the night settle over me like a heavy blanket. The silence inside the car expanded until it felt suffocating. My reflection in the rearview mirror stared back at me, eyes wide, shocked, and more defeated than I had ever seen them. No one had spoken for me. Not my cousins, not my relatives, not even the woman who gave me life. The knowledge lodged itself deep in my throat, heavier than any insult Frank had ever delivered. My mother's silence had cut through me with a precision that left no room for excuses. She had seen me fall. She had watched me struggle to stand. She had heard the contempt in Frank's voice. She had done nothing. A hollow feeling spread through my chest as I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, the cool surface grounding me in a moment that felt painfully unreal. Years of small injustices, quiet dismissals, and subtle betrayals resurfaced in a single overwhelming rush. I could no longer pretend that patience would bring balance or that endurance would eventually yield respect. My tears finally broke free, slipping down my cheeks in unchecked streams. They came not from weakness, but from the realization that I had been living inside a lie. The validation I sought from my family had never existed. The loyalty I gave them had never been returned. The home I tried to protect had never been mine to claim. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me, surprising in its intensity. The absurdity of the situation settled over me with a strange clarity. I had been pushed aside in front of an entire room, and instead of outrage, I received stillness. The very people who should have risen to defend me had chosen convenience and comfort over truth. Yet as the tears slowed, a new sensation began to form beneath the heartbreak. It felt small at first, a faint ember hidden within the ashes of disappointment. The ember pulsed with something unfamiliar yet unmistakable. It felt like resolve. My hand brushed against the old laptop resting on the back seat, the one I kept stored away more out of habit than purpose. My father's laptop, the last thing he left behind that felt untouched by Frank's influence. I had never fully explored it, unsure what memories or information it contained. A quiet instinct told me that tonight, of all nights, I needed to open it. The humiliation at the dinner table had left a scar, but scars often mark the beginning of a transformation. I wiped my tears, inhaled deeply, and reached for the laptop, feeling the weight of it settle into my lap. I sensed that whatever waited inside would alter the course of everything I thought I knew. And the truth hidden within that device was only moments away from revealing a world I never imagined. The glow from the laptop screen illuminated the inside of my car with a pale, fragile light, yet it felt stronger than anything I had felt in years. My fingertips hovered above the keyboard for a long moment, steadying themselves as my thoughts shifted away from heartbreak and toward something sharper. The quiet ache inside me had not disappeared, but it had transformed into a calm, deliberate focus that surprised even me. The memory of Frank's voice echoed in my ears, each cruel syllable striking with perfect clarity. His assertion that Brittany deserved a place I had occupied my entire life might have shattered someone else. Instead, it awakened a part of me I had long neglected, a part that refused to disappear quietly. A laptop whirred softly as it opened a folder my father had labeled with my name. The simple gesture spoke louder than any support my living family had offered me. He had known I would need strength in his absence. He had known the world could be unkind. He had left something behind to protect me, even if he could no longer stand beside me. The screen revealed documents, emails, financial records, and notes written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Each line carried intention. Each file held purpose. My breath deepened as I scanned through the first few pages, realizing that the truth I needed had always been within reach. All I needed was the courage to see it. My tears had dried. My heart had steadied. My mind had begun to piece together a picture far larger than Frank's cruelty at a dinner table. The shift inside me felt precise and grounding. I no longer saw myself as the girl pushed to the floor while a room full of relatives pretended not to notice. I saw myself as someone capable of reclaiming more than a seat. I saw a strategy forming, quiet but powerful, rooted not in anger alone, but in justice. The first step did not require confrontation. It required understanding. It required observation, patience, and the willingness to uncover what had been kept from me. Frank had built his dominance on the assumption that I would remain silent. He had no idea how dangerous silence could become once broken. I closed the laptop gently, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for what it represented. My father had left me tools. I was finally ready to use them. The night that began with humiliation was ending with something far more decisive. And the information waiting inside those folders was about to reveal a truth Frank never intended me to find. The first document that caught my attention appeared far too organized to be casual. My father had labeled it with a date that preceded his illness, suggesting he had prepared it long before anyone realized how limited his time would be. The file opened to a scanned copy of a financial statement that did not match any of the records Frank had shown my mother over the years. Columns of numbers aligned with meticulous precision, and handwritten notes filled the margins in my father's familiar script. The realization formed slowly, like a curtain lifting inch by inch. My father had been tracking discrepancies long before his death. Transfers, withdrawals, and unexplained gaps in company accounts were highlighted in red. Names of vendors and invoices repeated with suspicious frequency. The deeper I read, the more undeniable the pattern became. Someone had been siphoning funds. The next file contained an email chain between my father and a legal advisor. Their conversation revealed concerns about unauthorized activity involving company assets. My father had suspected internal tampering, and he had initiated inquiries that never reached completion. One message included an attachment titled, for future protection, containing clauses related to inheritance, asset control, and safeguards meant specifically for me. The terms were clear and legally binding. Yet the version Frank presented after my father's death lacked several of these protections. The question pressed against my mind with growing weight. How much had Frank altered, concealed, or manipulated after stepping into a position he had no rightful claim to? The following folder added another layer to the unfolding truth. My father had compiled property documents, insurance forms, and bank statements, organized with a precision that contrasted sharply with Frank's chaotic explanations over the years. An entire subsection highlighted the educational funds he had created for me. The original amount was far higher than what Frank claimed remained. The depletion did not align with market changes. It aligned with the timeline of Brittany's tuition payments and extravagant expenses. The connection felt undeniable. A surge of cold clarity settled through me as my eyes traced the movement of money from my accounts toward ventures connected to Brittany. Art school fees, travel costs, and purchases disguised as business expenses formed a trail that wove through the very documents I now held in my hands. Another discovery waited in the final folder. My father had begun drafting a secondary will, one that reinforced legal safeguards to prevent the misuse of his assets. Several clauses specifically restricted step-parent control, and one of them explicitly prohibited the sale or transfer of the family business without my written consent. Yet, after his death, the business had shifted entirely into Frank's control. With my mother signing documents she believed were standard. The signatures appeared genuine, but the explanations Frank had offered at that time no longer aligned with what I was reading. A chill crept through me as the broader picture formed. This was no series of misunderstandings. This was a deliberate dismantling of my inheritance, my education, and my place in the family. The humiliation at the dinner table was not an isolated cruelty. It was part of a pattern rooted deeper than I had imagined. The weight of the evidence settled in my chest with equal parts dread and certainty. I understood now that Frank's dominance over our household was built on deception, manipulation, and a calculated misuse of trust. My father had seen the danger forming, yet fate had taken him before he could reveal everything. A quiet resolve strengthened inside me as I closed the last file. I had uncovered only the beginning of the truth. What waited beyond these documents would expose far more than Frank ever intended to hide. The evidence in front of me did not require emotional interpretation. It required action. My father had left a blueprint, and Frank had left a trail. Both would serve a purpose now. A quiet transformation settled inside me as I shifted from discovery to strategy, moving with the kind of clarity that emerges only when every illusion has been stripped away. The first step demanded organization. I created a secure folder on my laptop, encrypting it with a password that required multiple layers of authentication. A separate hard drive waited beside me, prepared to store duplicates of every file. My father had taught me the value of redundancy, and Frank had taught me the cost of misplaced trust. I refused to make either mistake now. The documents spoke in numbers, signatures, and discrepancies, but the story they told needed to be translated into something actionable. I began drafting a timeline that connected each financial shift to a corresponding event within our family. Brittany's tuition payment aligned perfectly with a withdrawal from my educational fund. A series of questionable vendor payments occurred shortly before Frank received a new car. Property transfers involving the family business matched moments when my mother appeared particularly overwhelmed. The patterns formed an elegant chain of cause and exploitation. The next layer required digital proof. I opened the messaging backup I had taken from Frank's phone earlier in the evening. Screenshots revealed an unsettling level of arrogance. His conversations included dismissive remarks about my intelligence, jokes about manipulating my mother through guilt, and discussions with associates about rerouting company assets. One message stood out from the rest. It outlined a plan to restructure ownership of the business entirely under his name within the next 6 months. The arrogance served me well that night because it provided the exact leverage I needed. I compiled every screenshot into a single document, organizing them chronologically and annotating each with context. Each timestamp became a small crack in the foundation Frank believed he had secured. His own words had built the very case that could dismantle everything he had constructed. The next step required drafting emails. Precision mattered. Emotion had no place in what I was about to create. I opened a new message addressed to financial regulators, attaching evidence of misappropriated funds and falsified business accounts. Another email, prepared for the State Attorney General, included documentation of inheritance manipulation, forged explanations, and unauthorized property transfers. A third message targeted the board members and silent partners connected to my father's company, detailing Frank's long-term intentions hidden behind polished presentations. Each email remained in draft form for the moment. Timing would determine the impact. A final piece of preparation involved my mother. Despite her silence, she deserved the truth. She had been misled just as effectively as I had been dismissed. A separate document compiled the version of events she never received. Legal proof replaced assumptions. Concrete evidence replaced emotional uncertainty. My message to her required delicacy. Yet it also required clarity. The story she believed about Frank had been built on lies. She needed to see the truth before the larger consequences unfolded. My plan demanded precision, restraint, and unwavering calm. Confrontation would give Frank time to retaliate. Silence, however, would allow me to position each piece exactly where it needed to fall. I scheduled the release of select emails to occur simultaneously at predetermined times. Regulators, business partners, and legal authorities would receive the information within minutes of one another. This method ensured that no single recipient could be influenced or silenced before the others reacted. The entire plan rested on one principle my father had always taught me: justice delivered without chaos loses its force. Justice delivered with perfect timing cannot be stopped. A sense of steadiness rose within me as I reviewed everything one final time. My humiliation at the dinner table had triggered this chain of events, but it was not the reason for my actions. The reason rested in the calculated betrayal that had stretched across years, hidden behind authority, confidence, and manipulation. The drafts waited patiently in the outbox, armed with truth and prepared to dismantle the illusion Frank had built around himself. All that remained was the moment to send them, and the perfect moment was approaching faster than he could ever anticipate. The morning arrived with an eerie stillness that clashed sharply with the storm I knew I was about to unleash. A faint blue dawn filtered through my curtains as I sat upright on my bed, my laptop open and waiting. The emails rested in the outbox with a quiet patience, each one carrying enough truth to fracture the carefully constructed image Frank had spent years maintaining. The clock struck 6 a.m. My finger moved with steady assurance as I pressed "Send all." A soft whoosh traveled across the screen, calm and unassuming, yet the repercussions behind it were anything but gentle. The first wave of chaos had been set in motion, and it would reach Frank before he realized how vulnerable he truly was. The notifications began sooner than expected. My phone vibrated with rapid frequency, lighting up with messages from numbers I barely recognized. Business partners, regulators, accountants, and even a former board member reached out with questions that held sharp undertones. Each message contained fragments of alarm, suspicion, and betrayal. Their concise inquiries painted a clear picture of the internal collapse just beginning to unfold. The group chat for the extended family erupted next. Dozens of messages appeared in sudden bursts, their tone frantic and disjointed. Who sent those documents? Is this real? Someone needs to call Frank immediately. Why was this hidden from all of us? The relatives who had watched me fall at the Christmas table now scrambled to understand why entire sections of our family legacy had been built on deception. Screenshots flowed into the chat faster than anyone could respond. My uncle posted a message in capital letters demanding clarity. My aunt responded with disbelief. My grandmother's single message appeared without punctuation, yet carried more weight than any elaborate explanation. It seems the truth is finally speaking. Another alert appeared, this time from the family business communication platform. A board member had initiated an emergency meeting. The subject line read, "Financial irregularities and immediate review required." The urgency radiated through the screen. Frank had spent years projecting control, yet now he faced a collective scrutiny capable of dismantling everything he claimed to manage. By 6:45 a.m., the tremors reached the household above mine. Frank's voice carried down through the building's stairwell, first faint and then unmistakably frantic. He shouted commands, yet none appeared to produce the results he wanted. The abrupt slam of a door echoed through the hallway, followed by hurried footsteps. His panic grew louder with each passing minute. At 6:52 a.m., he attempted to call me. The screen lit up with his name, but I let it ring. Another call came seconds later, then another. Each one reflected the cracks in his confidence. The collective pressure intensified when regulators replied to the emails. Their responses were direct, formal, and unsettlingly fast. They requested detailed verification and announced the initiation of an inquiry. The tone of their communication made one fact undeniable. Frank no longer controlled the narrative. A message from my mother appeared next. Her words trembled through the screen. "What is happening? What are these documents? Is this true?" Her confusion carried the weight of someone who realized the foundation of her life had shifted beneath her feet. I read her message twice before responding with the calm clarity she deserved. I sent her a file containing the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. The next notification came from Brittany. She demanded explanations with an entitlement that had begun to crumble beneath the pressure. Her message revolved around fear rather than arrogance. She had always assumed her father could protect her world. She had never considered what would happen when his world unraveled first. The sound of another series of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Frank's pace had grown uneven, his voice fractured with disbelief. The entire building seemed to vibrate with the tension he attempted to hide. He had built his power on perception, and perception had begun to collapse. The chaos unfolding in front of me was not revenge delivered through rage. It was consequence delivered through truth. The pieces were shifting exactly as planned. And Frank was facing a reality he had never prepared for. The first wave had struck, but it was only the beginning. The second wave would reveal far more than financial dishonesty. The backlash arrived with a force far more abrupt than the chaos I had unleashed that morning. Frank had always operated from a place of confidence, but desperation transformed him into something far more volatile. His instinct for control refused to surrender, and he responded with a counterattack meant to twist the truth in his favor before it could fully settle against him. The first move came through a sharply worded letter delivered to my inbox at precisely 9:12 a.m. The header displayed the name of a law firm known for representing clients who sought to intimidate rather than negotiate. The message accused me of defamation, corporate sabotage, and unauthorized access to confidential data. A threat of a lawsuit valued at $2 million filled the second page, heavy with legal jargon designed to overwhelm rather than inform. The accusations did not surprise me. Frank had relied on intimidation for years. Yet a faint tremor of unease moved through me as I scrolled through the document. He had brought in a legal team capable of generating noise loud enough to confuse those unaware of the truth. Noise had always been one of his most effective weapons. The second move emerged through social channels. A polished post appeared on his business page, filled with statements crafted to deflect responsibility. He portrayed himself as a victim of malicious misinformation, insisting that his leadership had been unfairly targeted by an individual who held personal grievances rather than factual concerns. His tone carried a rehearsed humility that would have sounded convincing to anyone unfamiliar with his patterns. The comments section exploded with mixed reactions. Some expressed support for him, praising his contributions and defending his character. Others requested transparency and demanded clarification regarding the allegations. The conversation grew heated within minutes. The third move struck harder than the first two. A message from Brittany appeared in the family chat, written with the emotional intensity she reserved for moments when attention slipped away from her. She described the accusations as fabricated and insisted that I was attempting to destroy their family during the holidays. Her words dripped with dramatized sorrow, each line crafted to paint her father as a noble figure, betrayed by the very person he had taken in. The shift in tone among relatives was immediate. Some rushed to Frank's defense, claiming the evidence I sent must have been altered or misunderstood. Others remained silent, unsure how to process the sudden fracture within our family. The same individuals who had watched me fall at the dinner table without flinching now hesitated to acknowledge the truth in front of them. The fourth move arrived only moments later. Frank scheduled a live interview on social media, positioning himself in front of a carefully staged background meant to portray stability and sincerity. He spoke about family, unity, and the dangers of misinformation. He emphasized the need for forgiveness and urged viewers to avoid jumping to conclusions. His words painted him as a reasonable man, navigating unfair accusations, a guardian of his household fighting against manufactured chaos. The performance possessed a familiar polish. He had used that same charm to win over my mother, to persuade friends, and to manipulate business partners. Now, he directed it toward the public. The pressure mounted quickly. I received messages from coworkers asking whether the rumors were true. A supervisor forwarded a human resources notice explaining that an internal review would be initiated due to potential conflict of interest concerns. Even distant acquaintances sent questions disguised as concern. The noise grew louder with every passing minute. The world around me appeared determined to test my resolve. Frank had constructed a narrative powerful enough to sway anyone who preferred comfort over confrontation. He wielded influence through fear, manipulation, and emotional performance. A combination capable of eclipsing the truth if given enough time. Yet beneath the pressure, an unexpected steadiness formed inside me. Every accusation he produced lacked the foundation of evidence. Every argument he presented leaned on theatrics rather than facts. Every attempt to frame himself as a victim exposed a growing fracture in his confidence. The counterattack had begun, but so had his unraveling. He had no idea that the strongest piece of evidence had not even surfaced yet. And once it did, the second wave of truth would dismantle everything he believed he could protect. A new email notification appeared on my screen with a subject line that held an unfamiliar weight. The sender's name was not someone I recognized, yet the tone of the message was unmistakably deliberate. It read, "We need to speak. Your father left unfinished business." The words forced me upright in an instant. For a moment, the world around me blurred, leaving only the message and the silent echo of its meaning. Another email followed immediately after, this time containing an attachment. The file name was simple, Archive A. My pulse quickened as the screen flickered, revealing a set of documents far older than any I had reviewed earlier. The papers had been scanned from originals marked with formal seals and signatures belonging to people I had never met. At the top of the page, my father's handwriting appeared again, accompanied by a note in the margin. "Simona will need this if something happens to me." The note struck me with such force that breathing became momentarily difficult. My father had anticipated danger with a clarity none of us understood at the time. The files contained confidential communications between him and a private investigator he had hired months before his illness became public. Their exchanges revealed suspicions about Frank long before he entered our home with polished charm and comforting words. My father had sensed something beneath the veneer, something cold and opportunistic. The investigators' reports detailed a troubling pattern. Frank had a history of embedding himself into the lives of vulnerable women. He had appeared under different names in different towns, always presenting himself as a source of support, before gradually redirecting financial control. Several of the reports ended abruptly, as if the investigation had been paused due to my father's declining health. Another document revealed something even more unsettling. My father had initiated a formal inquiry with a federal agency regarding suspicious transfers connected to Frank. The inquiry had been temporarily suspended after his death due to lack of follow-up. The words "pending verification" appeared several times, followed by a note explaining that additional evidence was required before the case could proceed. The situation shifted from personal betrayal to something far broader. A third message appeared in my inbox while I reviewed the files. The sender introduced herself as someone who had worked closely with my father during the final months of his life. She explained that he had shared only fragments of his concern, but had left instructions in the event anything happened to him. She had delayed contacting me until now because she believed timing mattered. Her message carried a solemn tone, one that hinted at truths still waiting in silence. She included a phone number and wrote only one sentence: "He trusted you to finish what he could not." The realization created a subtle tremor in my chest. I was no longer confronting a single betrayal. I was stepping into a place where my father's unfinished efforts intersected with my recent discoveries. The relief of having an ally, even one I had never met, held a strange warmth. Someone else understood what my father had suspected. Someone else had been waiting for this moment. Another surprise emerged from the back of the laptop case. A small envelope rested beneath the battery cover, sealed with a strip of tape that had aged at the edges. Inside the envelope lay a flash drive and a handwritten message from my father. "If you reach this point, do not stop." The flash drive contained encrypted files that required a password. I entered the first 3 passwords that came to mind, none of which worked. Then I hesitated, remembering the one habit my father never changed. I typed in the date of my birthday. The drive unlocked instantly. Video footage appeared first. The clips showed my father seated in his office, speaking directly to the camera with a measured calm that carried a hint of urgency. He explained that he had grown suspicious of Frank's intentions early on, particularly after noticing discrepancies in business accounts. He described meetings where Frank pressed him to restructure ownership, conversations where Frank subtly encouraged my mother to relinquish certain responsibilities, and moments where he witnessed attitudes that contradicted the persona Frank presented publicly. The recordings continued with timelines, financial models, and projections that revealed how deeply Frank had planned to entangle himself in the family business. One clip stopped me cold. My father mentioned that he believed my mother was being manipulated emotionally, and that he feared I would become a target if Frank viewed me as an obstacle. His voice softened near the end of the recording. "If you are watching this, Simona, then something has gone wrong. You must protect yourself. You must protect what I built for you and your future. You are stronger than you believe. Trust the evidence. Trust your instincts." The screen faded, leaving me staring at the darkness that followed the final frame. A quiet stillness filled the room as I processed the magnitude of what I had uncovered. My father had not merely prepared documents. He had prepared a defense. He had left a pathway for me to expose what he had begun investigating. One more message appeared, this time through a private number. The text contained only 9 words. "You are not alone in this. We have been watching." A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from the weight of the truth now opening before me. Frank believed he was fighting me alone. He would soon learn that he had underestimated far more than one daughter determined to reclaim justice. And the next revelation waiting in the shadows would devastate everything he thought he controlled. The second wave of consequences began before Frank had recovered from the first. A crisp morning sun rose over the neighborhood, yet the atmosphere around his life darkened with each passing hour. The agencies that received my evidence had moved with unexpected speed. Several of them did not wait for explanations or excuses. They arrived armed with subpoenas, documentation requests, and a determination that stripped away the last fragments of the facade Frank had spent years perfecting. The first official step occurred when 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Division visited the family home. Their presence arrived with a knock that carried the weight of law. They requested access to company records, personal tax filings, and bank statements. Frank attempted to present a calm demeanor, yet the tremor in his voice betrayed him. My mother stood behind him in quiet disbelief as the investigators explained the nature of the inquiry. Her eyes shifted toward me, carrying a mixture of betrayal, regret, and dawning clarity. The second step unfolded when the board members of my father's company held an emergency meeting without Frank's involvement. The partners who once trusted his confidence began voicing concerns that had simmered beneath the surface for years. They confronted financial irregularities, unauthorized decisions, and inconsistent reporting practices. A unanimous vote suspended him from leadership, pending full investigation. The titles he flaunted so proudly were stripped away in minutes. The public collapse followed shortly after that. His carefully crafted social presence, designed to portray him as a dedicated family man and successful businessman, disintegrated under scrutiny. Articles circulated online detailing the allegations. Comments appeared beneath his previous posts, demanding answers he could not provide. Support shifted to suspicion, and suspicion transformed into collective condemnation. The admiration he once enjoyed dissolved faster than he expected. The legal developments accelerated with ruthless precision. Regulators froze several accounts linked to questionable transfers. Auditors demanded verification for transactions he could not explain. Attorneys representing silent partners submitted formal complaints, citing breaches of fiduciary duty. Even Brittany found herself entangled in the backlash. Her credit cards were suspended pending investigation into her involvement with misappropriated funds. The collapse reached her faster than she could process. One moment crystallized everything. Frank attempted to confront me directly. He appeared at my door with the disheveled desperation of a man who had lost control of every narrative he once dominated. His voice shook as he insisted that I retract my claims, stating that everything had been a misunderstanding. He spoke as if appealing to reason, yet the panic in his words revealed his true motive. I listened without responding, allowing him to unravel in front of me. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the man who once pushed me across a room now begged for relief. He pleaded for a chance to explain himself, yet none of his explanations addressed the evidence. They addressed only his fear. The moment ended with a soft knock on the hallway wall behind him. 2 federal agents stepped forward, their presence calm but firm. They requested that Frank accompany them for questioning. His face drained of color as he realized their arrival was not coincidental. They had been observing the conversation, waiting for the appropriate time. My mother watched from a distance, her expression a mixture of heartbreak and awakening. She understood the truth now, not because I had told her, but because the evidence had spoken louder than any argument. The final blow arrived through the legal channels my father had prepared years before. His secondary will, the one Frank never saw, was validated after a thorough examination. The judge acknowledged its authenticity, reinforced its conditions, and reinstated the protections my father had intended for me. The family business returned to my control. The property Frank had manipulated ceased to be his. The educational funds he had drained were accounted for in legal restitution. The courtroom delivered its ruling with clarity and finality. Frank faced charges involving financial misconduct, inheritance manipulation, and willful deception. The consequences extended beyond financial penalties. The damage to his reputation became irreparable. The social fallout, swift and merciless. The justice delivered felt precise, steady, and deeply earned. Yet even as the dust began to settle, one question lingered in the back of my mind. If this was the end of Frank's reign, then what path waited for me beyond the ruins he left behind? The weeks that followed unfolded with a calm I had forgotten was possible. The absence of Frank's influence felt almost unreal at first, as if removing him from our lives had silenced a noise I never realized was constant. My home no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a place where air moved freely, where conversations resumed without fear, and where I could exist without being measured against someone else's expectations. My mother approached healing with a fragile determination. Her voice softened, not from submission, but from clarity returning to a mind long overshadowed by manipulation. She apologized in ways that did not attempt to rewrite the past, but instead acknowledged the harm silently endured. Our relationship did not repair overnight, yet each conversation rebuilt a trust that had been buried beneath years of quiet imbalance. My father's business became a cornerstone of my new stability. Stepping into leadership felt daunting, yet every document he left behind served as a reminder that he believed in my capability long before I believed in it myself. I hired new auditors, reinstated ethical practices, and rebuilt relationships with partners Frank had alienated. The company began to thrive again, not because of luck, but because truth had finally been allowed to breathe. My personal life found balance in unexpected ways. I reconnected with friends I had distanced myself from during the turmoil. I found comfort in quiet routines, long walks, and simple joys that once felt out of reach. The weight on my chest lifted gradually, replaced by a strength forged through fire rather than granted through ease. I felt no triumph in Frank's downfall. I felt liberation in reclaiming what he attempted to steal. One afternoon, while organizing my father's files, I discovered a small note tucked between 2 folders. The handwriting was unmistakably his. "You will know what to do when the time comes. I trust your heart. The message grounded me in a way nothing else could. It reminded me that my journey was never about destruction. It was about restoration. It was about reclaiming a life built on truth, intention, and dignity. The path ahead stretched wider than I expected. New opportunities emerged, new connections formed, and new purpose replaced the ache of betrayal. Yet one final truth waited quietly, unspoken, but inevitable. The story did not end with justice alone. It ended with a lesson I was finally ready to share. Every story leaves behind a message, yet some truths reveal themselves only when everything familiar has fallen apart. My journey taught me that silence is not peace, obedience is not harmony, and endurance is not strength when the cost is your dignity. The world often tells us to endure unfairness for the sake of family, appearances, or tradition. But genuine loyalty cannot exist where truth is denied. Strength does not always rise with a roar. Sometimes it appears quietly, in the decision to question a lie, in the courage to confront what feels impossible, or in the refusal to accept a place someone else forces upon you. My fall at the Christmas table felt humiliating in the moment, yet it became the spark that revealed everything I needed to see. Justice began not with confrontation, but with clarity. Revenge arrived not through destruction, but through truth. The lesson I carry now is simple. Never underestimate the power of truth held by someone who finally decides to stop being silent. Never allow cruelty to disguise itself as authority. Never forget that you have the right to reclaim the space someone unjustly stole from you. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Your worth is not negotiable. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when someone underestimated you, only to discover that you were far stronger than they believed? Share your story in the comments. Your experience may become the reminder someone else needs to finally stand up and reclaim their own truth.